Everyone always imagines disaster as loud. Sirens, shouting, explosions. But when your entire world collapses in a single heartbeat, the first thing you hear isn't sound at all. It's silence. An unnatural kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums like a warning. I was mid-debug on a line of code when it happened. The familiar soothing hum of my servers, 6 half-height racks of beautiful buzzing machines vanished. The whispering fans in my custom cooling unit? Gone. The low, steady thrum of the uninterruptible power supply that guarded my entire livelihood like a silent sentry? Silent. It wasn't just a power outage. I would have welcomed a blackout. No, this was worse. This was the absence of everything. A second later, the alarms screamed to life. Not the movie kind, no fire bells or blaring sirens. These were mine, custom, subtle, designed to tell me exactly how bad things were with minimal chaos. A sharp, piercing tone in my left ear. Physical layer failure, not good. A low, oscillating warble in my right. Total external network collapse. Catastrophic. I got them both. At once. My eyes darted to my monitors. The comforting sea of greens and blues, status lights, network graphs, active sessions, all of it was drowned in violent, urgent red. Connection lost, critical failure, gateways unresponsive. Packet loss, 100%. My blood went cold. This wasn't a denial of service attack. This wasn't software. This wasn't some script kiddie poking at my firewalls. This was impossible. Someone had physically unplugged my world. I tried the Wi-Fi. Nothing. My phone disconnected instantly, switching to LTE. The moment it did, it lit up with a high-priority client notification, Tri-State Water Authority. My stomach dropped. My phone buzzed again. Another client. And another. My screen was a rapid-fire cascade of urgent pings, all at once. A cold, sharp dread bloomed in my chest. I pushed away from my desk so fast my chair scraped against the concrete floor of my converted garage office. I felt the bass drum thud of my own heartbeat in my ears as I stumbled toward the single small window facing the street. My neighborhood, Maple Creek Estates. Identical houses, manicured lawns, beige boxes lined in perfect rows like an architectural army. And then I saw her. Brenda. She was standing at the edge of my immaculate HOA-approved lawn, practically glowing in the harsh Saturday morning sun. In one hand, she clutched a pair of heavy-duty garden shears, the kind designed to cut through thick branches. In the other, dangling like the corpse of some bisected animal, were 2 severed ends of my commercial-grade armored fiber optic line. She didn't look guilty. She wasn't running. She was admiring her work. A smug, righteous smirk stretched across her face. For a moment, my brain couldn't process it. It was like watching someone solve an argument by setting the entire house on fire. Brenda, my neighbor. My tormentor, my tyrant in pastel pink, president of the Maple Creek Estates HOA, and now, saboteur. This wasn't random. This was war. It hadn't started with the cable. No. This was the inevitable conclusion to a slow-burn feud, a clash of worlds, one I had been trying desperately to avoid for weeks. It began like most suburban wars do with something small, a trash can. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been living my version of heaven, caffeinated, productive, uninterrupted, a perfect Tuesday. Ethiopian single origin in my hand, feet up, monitoring live traffic from a water reclamation plant in Des Moines, while casually batting away a brute force attack on their firewall. The hum of servers in the background, sprinklers hissing in, synchronized harmony across the neighborhood. Peace. Then the doorbell rang. Not a friendly ding-dong. Not the kind you hear when a neighbor comes by with banana bread. This was an insistent double press, the kind used by people who think their time matters more than yours. When I opened the door, I met Brenda for the first time, mid-50s, pastel. Pink tracksuit with a matching visor, white sneakers so bright they looked weaponized, clipboard clutched like a scepter. "Alex," she asked, though it sounded less like a question and more like an accusation. Her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning past me, dissecting my entryway for flaws. "That's me," I said, forcing a smile. "Brenda," she said, tapping the clipboard. "President of the Homeowners Association. I'm here about a violation." I blinked. "A violation?" "Section 4, subsection C," she intoned, voice dripping with bureaucratic righteousness. "Waste receptacles. They must be removed from public view by 7 p.m. on collection day. Your receptacles," she paused for dramatic flair, "were still visible at 8:05 p.m. last night. I have photographic evidence." I laughed, out loud, because how could I not? Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes, they hardened. "The HOA does not kid about charter violations, Alex," she said. "This is about maintaining community standards, curb appeal, property values." "Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I was on a conference call with the people managing the power grid for 3 states. We were dealing with a brownout. I'm sorry if preventing a blackout made me late to bring in the trash cans." She didn't blink. "We all have our responsibilities. Mine is to this community." And then her gaze shifted, past me, into my house. Her nose twitched. "What? Is that humming sound?" "That's my air conditioner." A lie. It was the custom cooling unit for my server rack. "It seems rather loud for residential use," she said, scribbling on her clipboard. "And that welcome mat," she pointed at the simple black mat under my feet. "That's not on the approved list." Section 2, subsection A. Fonts are restricted to Times New Roman or Helvetica. That is Calibri. My jaw literally dropped. "I run cybersecurity for municipal utilities. I keep people's drinking water clean and their lights on. I've traced hackers across continents. And here I was, being cited for an unapproved font. She handed me a printed violation notice like it was an indictment from The Hague." "This is a warning," she said, smiling. "Second offense carries a $50 fine. Have a wonderful day." And just like that, she turned and marched off, squeaky white shoes in perfect rhythm, a queen returning to her pastel kingdom. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't a friendly HOA president doing her job. This was a tyrant with a clipboard. That night, I received an email from her. Subject, helpful information. It contained a PDF of the 150-page HOA rulebook and a file of approved welcome mat. Designs. The war had begun. I didn't want it. But Brenda? Brenda needed an enemy. The escalation came a week later when I brought in contractors to upgrade my internet. My business was growing. I needed more bandwidth, more stability. A dedicated fiber line, commercial grade, straight to my garage. I hired pros. Permits? Secured. Utilities marked. The works. Enter Dave and Gary, contractors built like refrigerators with beards that could house small woodland creatures. These guys had worked everywhere. They were Zen masters of excavation. They'd just cut a clean, perfect trench across my lawn when Brenda appeared, pink tracksuit blazing like battle armor. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Dave, who looked like he could win an arm wrestling match with a grizzly, paused mid-shovel, startled. "Cease all unauthorized excavation immediately." Brenda barked, storming onto my lawn. I came out with my permits in hand. "Brenda, it's all here. We're fully authorized." She snatched the papers, scanning them with the disappointed air of someone who'd been robbed of a fight. And then, she found her weapon. "The city permit is irrelevant," she declared. "Section 9, subsection A of the Architectural Guidelines. Landscaping alterations require approval from the Architectural Review Committee." "The what?" "Me, Carol from number 42, and Bob from 56, she said, puffing up. "And I can tell you right now, we would never approve this." Dave and Gary exchanged a look of disbelief. "Ma'am," Dave said gently, "this trench will be filled and perfect by lunch. No one will even know we were here." But Brenda was already snapping pictures, measuring shovels with a tape measure she'd pulled from her tracksuit. Work stopped. Dave and Gary packed up, apologizing to me as Brenda stood with arms crossed, victorious. That night, staring at the scar she'd left in my lawn, I realized something. She'd mistaken my quiet for weakness. She thought this was her battlefield. But Brenda didn't know who she was fighting, and she had no idea what kind of war I could wage. Everyone thinks they know what anger feels like. But real anger, soul-deep, blood-boiling fury, doesn't feel hot. It feels cold, like ice in your veins, like someone has reached into your chest and squeezed until there's no room for anything else. That's what I felt as I stood in that window, staring at Brenda. She wasn't even looking at me. She was chatting with another neighbor now, holding my severed fiber optic cable like some kind of trophy. Her pink tracksuit blazed in the eyes. Sun, that smug little smirk glued to her face like she'd just saved the world. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then my phone vibrated on my desk. Once, twice, over and over, until it buzzed itself halfway across the table. I snatched it up. Alex, what the hell is going on? Frank, head of IT for Tri-State Water Authority. Normally calm. Normally unflappable. Right now, he sounded like he was choking. We're blind. All of our remote monitors are down. Every reservoir, every pumping station, every treatment plant. Dark. The system's running on autopilot protocols. But if a pump fails, or a chemical balance shifts, we won't know until 3 cities have brown water coming out of their taps. What is happening? My blood went from ice to mercury. Give me 5 minutes, I said. My voice didn't match my insides. Calm, controlled, a mask over the storm. 5 minutes? Alex, Frank. My tone left no room for argument. 5 minutes, I'll call you back. I hung up before he could respond. There was no time. I sprinted through my house, past the kitchen, down the basement stairs, 2 at a time. My breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. My hands were shaking, but my mind, clear, razor-edged. People think cybersecurity is about coding. Firewalls, passwords. They're wrong. It's about planning for when everything goes wrong at once. It's about surviving the worst day imaginable. This was that day. I hit the cold concrete floor of my basement and went straight to the farthest corner, behind the ancient water heater. My secret. Every suburban house has skeletons. Mine just happened to be from the Cold War. I ripped away a panel of drywall I'd installed myself. Behind it, buried in cobwebs and dust, sat my ace in the hole, a heavy-duty olive-drab junction box, about the size of a shoebox, stamped on its surface in faded stenciling, property of U.S. Dept of Defense, cog trunk line 7B cog continuity of government. I'd found it when I bought the house, digging through municipal records the way most people browse Zillow listings. It was a digital ghost, part of an abandoned network built decades ago to keep the government connected if Moscow turned into a crater. Most of it had been shut down in the 80s, but the physical infrastructure, the glass in the ground, still there. And one of those lines ran directly under my property. I'd mapped it, studied it, marveled at it like a relic. I never thought I'd need it until today. My hands worked on muscle memory. My specialized toolkit was already prepped, because if you work in my line of business, you don't just expect the worst. You plan for it. I yanked the now-dead fiber input from my server gateway, my lifeline, my connection to the outside world, severed by a woman with garden shears. I stripped back the casing, exposing the delicate glass core, praying I wouldn't snap it. Then I turned to the trunk line box. Its bolts groaned in protest as I unfastened them, revealing pristine hardware untouched for decades. A time capsule of Cold War paranoia. Fiber is fiber. Language may change, protocols may evolve, but at the end of the day, it's still glass, still light, still data. With shaking hands, I aligned the 2 ends, my modern fiber and that Cold War relic, and brought out my fusion splicer. For anyone who's never used one, imagine a tool that performs surgery with lightning. It melts 2 glass fibers together with microscopic precision, creating a seamless bridge. One wrong move and you start over. My hands were slick with sweat, but my focus? Absolute. This was my lifeline, my client's lifeline, my city's lifeline. 2 minutes. That's all it took. 2 minutes that felt like an hour. When the connection sealed, I jammed the freshly spliced line into a port labeled Node 7B1A. I bypassed every modern handshake protocol. I forced my system to speak a dead language, obsolete, forgotten, but one I'd quietly learned for fun years ago. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a single green light flickered on inside the box. Another, and another. They cascaded across my server gateway, changing from angry, screaming red to amber. Then to a solid, glorious green. I was online. Not just online. Flying. I scrambled back upstairs, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. I sat at my command console and typed, "Tracer out 8.8.8.8. The path came back. My jaw dropped. This wasn't going through any ISP. It wasn't bouncing through local hubs. 10-point MEMS, Node 7B, 1A, CO, PAN, G, MIL, 21 MEMS, PNTG, DMZ, US.gov. My signal was traveling through the bones of a ghost network. A Cold War lifeline resurrected in my basement. My bandwidth test, beyond. Anything commercially available? Ping? Practically non-existent. It felt like I'd gone from driving a rusty sedan to hot-wiring an F-22 fighter jet. I grabbed my phone. Frank picked up on the first ring. "Refresh your screens," I said. A beat of silence, frantic clicking. Then, holy, mother of... His voice dropped to a whisper. "We're back. Alex. It's faster than before. It's faster than it's ever been. What did you do? Did you launch a damn satellite?" I leaned back in my chair, adrenaline finally starting to ebb. "Something like that," I said. And for a brief, beautiful moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Until I saw the lights. Not from my servers. From outside, flashing red and blue, reflecting, off my beige siding like a warning siren from the universe. 2 police cruisers, of course. Brenda had called the cops. I watched through the window as she marched up to them. Clipboard still in hand, waving my severed fiber like a trophy. She was animated now, her voice carrying across the lawn, casting herself as the brave defender of Maple Creek Estates. Pointing at my house like it was a drug den. 2 officers got out. One older, lined face, eyes tired in that way only cops who've seen everything get. Miller, his nameplate said. The other younger, sharp, full of by-the-book energy. Ramirez. I could stay inside, hide, or I could meet them on my terms. I straightened. My t-shirt, took a deep breath, and walked outside. "She's running some kind of illegal operation," Brenda shouted as soon as she saw me. "Unlicensed, dangerous, look at this industrial cable." When I confronted him, I had to take decisive action to protect our community. Miller turned his weary gaze to me. "Sir, are you Alex?" "I am," I said, keeping my voice level. "She says you're running a data mine out of your house," he said, mouth twitching like he was fighting a smirk. "Officer," I said, perfectly polite. "I run a fully licensed cybersecurity firm. From my home." "That woman," I pointed at Brenda, who was still clutching the severed fiber, "just destroyed $50,000 worth of infrastructure and took the municipal water supply for 3 cities offline for 4.5 minutes. Ramirez stopped writing mid-note. "Wait, the water supply? She's lying," Brenda snapped. "He's trying to intimidate me. Look at this cable. That's not normal." "She's right about that part," I said. "It's commercial grade. Fiber. Costs more per foot than your cruiser." And she cut it with garden shears. Miller let out a long, soul-deep sigh, the sound of a man questioning his career choices. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, "put the cable down." And just like that, the balance shifted. Brenda didn't know it yet, but this was the moment she'd lost. I've always believed there's a split second in every conflict when the tide turns. It's not when the victor celebrates or the loser retreats. It's quieter than that, almost invisible. A moment when you know, deep in your bones, that the game has changed forever. That moment came when Officer Miller told Brenda to put the cable down. She froze. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked unsure. But then, like the tyrant she fancied herself to be, she straightened her visor, stuck her nose in the air, and said, "I cut it." And I'd do it again. It was a violation of HOA Bylaw 7.2 regarding unapproved external fixtures. Miller glanced at his partner. "Write that down," he said to Ramirez. His tone was casual. But his eyes? They flickered toward me for just a second, sharp and knowing. I felt it then. The shift. Brenda thought she was winning. She thought she was turning the police into her personal enforcers. But in that one proud, stupid declaration, she'd just confessed to a felony. "Sir," Miller said, turning back to me, "can we see your setup, just to verify?" "Of course," I said, already stepping aside. I didn't lead them through my house like a criminal ashamed of his crime. I led them like a tour guide. This wasn't shame. This was theater. When I opened the garage door, their expressions shifted instantly. The soft hum of servers filled the space like a living creature breathing. LED lights blinked in rhythmic patterns across racks of equipment. Cables ran in neat, disciplined lines, feeding into cooling systems humming like mechanical monks. This wasn't a data mine. It looked like mission control. "Whoa," Ramirez breathed, stepping forward like a kid seeing NASA for the first time. "As I said calmly, cybersecurity. I monitor networks for clients, utilities, banks, hospitals. These..." I pointed to the screen where a dozen green dots pulsed across a map of the Midwest. "Are live connections to critical infrastructure. This is what I do. Legally, licensed, fully registered with the state." I showed them the framed business license on the wall. My corporate registration, even the emails from Frank at the Water Authority, time-stamped and frantic. "This," I said, gesturing to the severed input cable on my rack, "is the line she cut, which for 4.5 minutes took the monitoring systems for 3 cities' water supply offline. In case you're wondering, that's the kind of thing that leads to lawsuits. Big ones." Ramirez's pen hovered over his notebook, stalling mid-scribble. "She really did that?" She really did. And then, as if to punctuate my point, my phone buzzed again. A new email from Frank. Subject line, "Incident report, Water Authority service outage." It included phrases like gross negligence, operational risk, and pending regulatory review. I didn't need to say anything. I just turned the phone toward them. Miller pinched the bridge of his nose like a man counting the hours to retirement. "Okay," he said, "so let me get this straight. You work from home on the computer. That's correct. And she..." He jerked a thumb toward Brenda, who was still standing in the driveway with arms crossed like some suburban Napoleon. "Cut your internet because she didn't like the look of it." "And my welcome mat," I added. Ramirez blinked. "Your what?" "Wrong font," I said, deadpan. There was a beat of silence. Even Miller almost laughed. "Almost." Brenda, sensing her grasp on the narrative slipping, snapped. "He's twisting this. He's breaking the rules. I acted to protect this community." But it was too late. Miller had already seen the bigger picture. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "for my report, did you or did you not cut that cable?" "I did," she said proudly, mistaking his tone for validation. "As president of the HOA, I had the authority..." "Ramirez," Miller said, cutting her off. "Make sure you get that. Quote her directly." "Got it," Ramirez said, his pen flying. Brenda kept talking, rattling off my supposed crimes. The trash cans, the humming servers, the mat. And the officers? They let her. Every word was another rope for her to hang herself with. By the time they were done, they'd handed me what I really wanted, a police report number, a permanent, undeniable record of Brenda's confession. It was more valuable than gold. "Sir," Miller said to me, "this is a civil matter for now. You'll need to pursue damages in court, but you've got her on the record. That'll help." "Oh," I said with a small smile. "It helps more than you know." They gave us both a case card and drove off, their expressions equal parts exhausted and relieved to be free of this ridiculous circus. Brenda stayed in the driveway, glaring at me like I'd personally destroyed her kingdom. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd brought me to heel. But she had no idea what I had in my pocket. As soon as I closed the door behind me, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My servers hummed quietly, my rerouted Cold War connection glowing like a secret I'd stolen from history. And for the first time all morning, I smiled. Because this wasn't just about fixing the line anymore. No, This was about ending her. The plan formed before I'd even sat back down. First call? My lawyer, Jessica. Sharp, efficient. The kind of attorney who didn't just win cases. She buried her opponents under the weight of their own stupidity. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained everything. I could hear the pause as she took a sip of coffee. "Your HOA president cut your commercial fiber line, which you used to run a business monitoring critical infrastructure, because she thought your welcome mat wasn't regulation font? And the cable violated their aesthetic," I added. Jessica laughed, a sharp, delighted bark. "Alex, don't do anything. Don't touch anything. Just document. Pictures, timelines, that police report. I want it all. This is the best case I've ever had." Second call? My clients. I didn't want lawsuits. Not yet. What I wanted were letters. Formal, terrifying letters on official letterhead. Frank from the Water Authority nearly jumped at the chance. "You want me to write a letter explaining how her hobby nearly caused a public health crisis? Alex, I'll have legal draft something that'll make her hair fall out." The Midwest Power Cooperative followed suit. Their letter used phrases like unacceptable grid vulnerability, cascading failure risk, and my personal favorite, forwarding this incident to the State Utilities Commission for review. It was corporate poetry. Third call, Dave and Gary. "She did what?" Dave bellowed so loud I had to hold the phone away. "Buddy, you need a statement from us? Done. You need an invoice for our lost time? Done. You want us to testify in court? Name the time. We hate HOA queens. We'll go to war for you." And finally, I started digging through every HOA meeting minute, every budget, every complaint. Brenda had been sloppy. She'd used HOA funds for community beautification, which somehow only improved her property. She'd waived fines for friends on the board while hammering everyone else. And then I found it, the nuclear option, buried in federal land records from the 1960s. A permanent, irrevocable communications easement, right through Maple Creek Estates. Brenda's kingdom wasn't just overregulated, it was illegal. I sat back in my chair, letting it all sink in. The police report, the letters, the invoices, the easement. Brenda thought this was about a welcome mat, but I was about to teach her. A lesson about waging war on someone who understands information. She'd fired the first shot. Now it was my turn. Some people fight with fists, some fight with words. Me? I fight with information, and by the time I was done, I had enough of it to burn Brenda's little kingdom to the ground. The next 72 hours were a blur of caffeine, code, and quiet. Rage. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I ran on purpose, on the electric hum of vengeance. The ghost line, my resurrected Cold War lifeline, was faster than anything I'd ever used. It didn't just put me online. It put me everywhere. Old county clerk servers, archived municipal records, decommissioned government databases nobody had touched in decades. My fingers moved across the keyboard like they were conducting an orchestra, pulling secrets out of the digital ether with surgical precision. I wasn't hacking. Not technically. I was just opening doors people had forgotten to lock. And behind those doors, Brenda's empire was rotting. I found everything. Every meeting minute, every budget report, every anonymous complaint she'd ever filed, most of which traced back to her and her little cabal. She'd used HOA funds to pay for a community beautification project that just so happened to replace her front walkway with imported stone. She'd fined people for untrimmed hedges while approving her friend Carol's neon pink flamingo garden as artistic expression. She'd waived late fees for Bob at number 56 when his dues were 3 months behind, but threatened to put a lien on the house of a widower on Maple Lane over a 20-fatter trash can fine. It was all there. Petty tyranny, written in PDFs and scanned receipts. And the pièce de résistance, the federal easement. In 1962, the U.S. government had carved out a permanent, irrevocable right-of-way for communications infrastructure across the land that would one day become Maple Creek Estates. It was never rescinded. Which meant, technically, every manicured lawn, every beige McMansion, every square foot of Brenda's fiefdom was sitting on a live federal easement. If I wanted, I could have turned her entire HOA into a case study for eminent domain. That little detail? I filed it under nuclear option. By the time I was done, I didn't just have a folder of evidence, I had a warhead. And then, right on cue, the email came. Subject: Emergency Board Meeting. You are hereby summoned to attend an emergency session of the Maple Creek Estates HOA Board of Directors regarding numerous and flagrant charter violations by the homeowner at 1138 Maple Lane, with potential punitive actions up to and including forced compliance and expulsion from the community. It was signed by Brenda. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I laughed. She wasn't just walking into my trap. She'd built the stage for it. The community center was exactly what you'd expect from a place like Maple Creek Estates. A beige box pretending to be civic architecture. Beige walls, beige folding chairs, beige linoleum floor that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and despair. About 20 residents had shown up. Some came out of curiosity. Others came for blood. They whispered behind their hands, eyes darting between me, the accused, and Brenda, their queen in exile. She sat at the front behind a long folding table, flanked by her cronies Carol and Bob. All three wore expressions of solemn, manufactured gravitas, like they were presiding over the Nuremberg trials instead of a neighborhood squabble. Brenda banged a tiny gavel. This emergency meeting of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association is now in session, she announced, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. We are here tonight to address a grave matter that threatens the very fabric of our community. She launched into a PowerPoint presentation. Of course she did. Slide 1, my trash cans. Time-stamped at 8:05 p.m. Slide 2, a close-up of my welcome mat, big red circle around the offending Calibri font. Slide 3, a photo of my contractors digging the trench captioned, unauthorized excavation in violation of Section 9. She went on and on. The humming from my servers, the industrial cable, and finally, a blurry picture of me talking to the police, framed like I was the villain in a true crime documentary. This man, Brenda said, pointing at me like a prosecutor, has shown a consistent and flagrant disregard for our community's rules. He is running a high-traffic, industrial-scale business from his home. He has attempted illegal property modifications. He represents everything we have worked so hard to protect ourselves from. Her voice cracked on the last line, maybe from faux indignation, maybe from the thrill of the performance. She clicked to her final slide. Recommended actions. I move, she said dramatically, that the board levy the maximum possible fine for each of his 17 documented violations and issue a formal cease and desist order against his home business, effective immediately. Gasps, murmurs. A cookie dropped somewhere in the back. Brenda looked out at the room, triumphant. Then she turned to me. Alex, she said, voice dripping with condescension. Do you have anything to say in your defense? I stood up slowly, deliberately. I didn't go to the podium. I didn't need to. I do, I said simply. I picked up the thick manila folder on my lap and walked to the front. I placed it on the table in front of Carol, the board secretary. You'll find several documents in there, I said calmly. Let's start with the police report. Case number 72556. It contains Officer Miller's account of Ms. Brenda's full confession to willfully destroying a piece of commercial telecommunications infrastructure. Brenda blinked. That, I continued, is a Class D felony in this state. Just in case anyone here was curious. The room went quiet. Second, I said, you'll find an invoice from my fiber provider for the emergency repair and replacement of the line your president destroyed. They've recommended that, given the unstable and hostile local environment, the new line be buried in a reinforced concrete conduit. Total cost, $72,450. Carol's hands trembled as she read it. Someone in the front row actually choked on a cookie. Since Brenda was acting in her official capacity as president of this HOA when she destroyed that cable, my lawyer has forwarded the invoice to your treasurer. I'm sure you'll want to handle that promptly to avoid late fees. Brenda's face was losing color by the second. Third, I said, letters from my clients, the Tri-State Water Authority and the Midwest Power Cooperative, detailing how Brenda's actions directly endangered the public water supply and the regional power grid. They've also indicated they'll be forwarding this incident to state and federal regulators. So, congratulations everyone. Maple Creek Estates. is now on the radar of agencies you've probably never heard of but should definitely fear. Carol set the letters down like they were radioactive. Bob leaned over to read them, his face going slack. And finally, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone, a signed statement from the contractors Brenda harassed when they were legally installing my fiber line, along with their $3,000 invoice for lost time and rescheduling fees. They're eager to testify in court. I let that sit, let the weight of it sink in. Which brings me to the recap, I said, stepping back. Your president's actions have resulted in over $75,000 in financial liabilities, endangered public safety, and put this entire community under state and federal scrutiny. So by all means, let's talk about my welcome mat. Silence, and then chaos. Residents shot to their feet, shouting, demanding answers, asking who would pay, asking how much, asking if they'd be dragged into lawsuits. Carol looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Bob's face was pure panic. Brenda? She was frozen, her carefully constructed kingdom crumbling in real time. The gavel pounded, but no one listened. This meeting, Bob finally croaked, is adjourned. The board will convene privately to discuss these unforeseen financial developments. They practically bolted from the table. And I sat back down, calm, quiet. The war was over. Brenda just didn't know it yet. If the meeting had been a battle, the days that followed were the aftermath of a bombing. The community center debacle had sent shockwaves through Maple Creek Estates. The whispers started before I even left the parking lot. By the next morning, they'd evolved into something more like a low-grade panic that rippled through every cul-de-sac and perfectly edged lawn. I didn't see Brenda the next day, or the day after that. For someone who had practically lived on the sidewalks in her pastel armor, clipboard in hand, her sudden absence was as loud as a gunshot. When I did see her, it wasn't on the street. It was in my email inbox. Subject, HOA notice, emergency board session outcome. The message was brief, clinical, and delicious. Brenda has stepped down as president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, effective immediately. Carol will serve as interim president until elections are held. To cover liabilities incurred by recent incidents, a one-time emergency assessment of $3,150 per household has been approved. No apology, no explanation, just the reality. Brenda's empire had cost every resident nearly $4,000, and me, I was exempt. It was the first time the HOA had ever sent me an email that didn't make me want to throw my laptop across the room. The neighborhood changed overnight. Where once there had been the constant, suffocating presence of Brenda, policing, trash cans, measuring grass, issuing warnings for the sin of individuality, now there was nothing. No pastel tracksuit on the horizon, no double-pressed doorbell chime, no late-night emails about my non-conforming welcome mat. It was quiet. Not the brittle, anxious quiet of a neighborhood bracing for the next HOA memo. This was different. This was the quiet of people who'd just watched their queen behead herself with her own rules and didn't want to be next. Neighbors who'd once pretended I didn't exist now crossed the street when I walked by. Some wouldn't make eye contact. Others offered me quick, nervous nods. A few whispered thanks under their breath. One afternoon, I found an apple pie on my doorstep. No note, no explanation, just a peace offering from some anonymous household trying to stay on the good side of the man who'd brought down the regime. I didn't touch it, but I appreciated the gesture. Meanwhile, Dave and Gary, my contractor heroes, came back like conquering warriors. "Buddy," Dave said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make my teeth rattle, "I've been waiting my whole career for this kind of payback." They didn't just reinstall my fiber, they entombed it. A reinforced conduit, triple-layer protection, buried so deep you'd need a backhoe and a death wish to get anywhere near it. "This line," Gary said, wiping his hands, "will survive the apocalypse." Brenda proved too. When I tried to pay them for their lost time, Dave waved me off. Seeing her face at that meeting, that's payment enough. And Brenda? She didn't just step down. She vanished. The pink tracksuit brigade disbanded. The weekly patrols stopped. Even her two cronies, Carol and Bob, kept their heads down, doing damage control for the HOA's battered reputation. Maple Creek Estates was leaderless. And I was a ghost story. The man who'd rerouted his house through a forgotten Cold War network, who'd embarrassed the HOA board in front of their own subjects, who'd turned a petty neighborhood tyrant into a cautionary tale. No one said it out, loud, but I saw it in their eyes. Fear. Not of me, exactly, but of what I represented. Someone who couldn't be bullied. Someone who fought back and won. A week later, I was back where I belonged, in my office, surrounded by the low, comforting hum of my servers. The new fiber connection purred like a dream. My screens were a serene ocean of green. Client systems stable. Traffic clean. I opened my network configuration panel. There it was, my ghost line. Still connected as a tertiary backup, I'd renamed it. It wasn't Trunk Line 7B anymore. It was the Brenda bypass. Every time I saw it, it made me smile. It's funny. People think peace is about harmony, about everyone getting along. They're wrong. Sometimes peace is bought with a $75,000 invoice, with a police report number, with the lingering, unspoken threat of federal intervention. Maple Creek Estates had finally given me what I wanted when I moved there, not just quiet, but peace, the kind that comes when everyone around you learns the same lesson. Some people aren't to be messed with, and I was one of them. People always assume the big moments in your life happen in a flash, sudden, explosive. But in my experience, the decisions that define you creep up slowly. They feel small at first. Choosing Maple Creek felt like that. When I signed the paperwork, I wasn't thinking about neighbors or HOAs or beige conformity. I wasn't thinking about Brenda, I was thinking about silence. At the time, my business, Quiet Sentry, had exploded almost by accident. Word of mouth had landed me contracts with mid-sized utilities, a handful of banks, a few local governments. Enough that I couldn't just sit in coffee shops with a laptop anymore. I needed a fortress, somewhere I could work without distraction, somewhere secure, somewhere quiet. I toured a dozen neighborhoods. Maple Creek wasn't the cheapest or the prettiest, but it had two things that sealed the deal: a gigabit fiber connection, one of the only places in the region offering it to residential properties, and a ghost. I've always been fascinated by the internet's underworld, not the dark web nonsense you see in movies, but the bones of it. The hidden tunnels. The abandoned infrastructure left behind like digital fossils. I stumbled across Line 7B while digging through public records one night, following a thread that started with an obscure Cold War-era defense contract and ended in a stack of dusty county surveys. On paper, it was dead. A decommissioned continuity of government trunk line. A Cold War paranoia project that had cost the U.S. millions to bury beneath the suburbs of Middle America. But when I traced the old maps against the modern grid, something caught my eye. It ran directly under Maple Creek Estates, right under the plot I'd eventually buy. I remember staring at the survey, feeling that little electric jolt that only comes when you realize you found something no one else sees, an abandoned artery of a forgotten network, and if it was still intact, even partially, it could be spliced, repurposed, resurrected. So, while other people were calculating school districts and property values, I was quietly mapping where the government's ghost slept. When I moved in, I didn't tell anyone what I was really looking for. Neighbors saw a 30-something tech guy moving into a beige box with blackout curtains. They probably assumed I was a hermit. They weren't wrong. But beneath my new house, I found it. The access panel was exactly where the surveys said it would be, hidden behind a crumbling concrete wall in my basement. When I cracked it open for the first time, I felt like I was trespassing in history. The box was heavy-duty steel, painted in that dull olive-drab green unique to government equipment. Dust coated everything. Cobwebs clung like ancient lace, and on the faceplate, stenciled in fading paint, property of the U.S. Department of Defense, Cog Trunk Line 7B. It was like opening a time capsule. The ports were archaic, designed for long-forgotten hardware. But the fiber? Still good. Still glass. I remember laughing quietly in that basement thinking, if I ever need a miracle, this will be it. For years, it just sat there, a curiosity. I'd show it to friends, the rare ones who visited, like a conversation. Peace. Most didn't get it. You're never actually going to use this, one of them said. I hope not, I'd replied, because to use it meant my world had fallen apart. And then Brenda happened. The thing people don't understand about someone, like me, someone who spends their life defending invisible walls, is that you don't just learn to fight threats, you learn to plan for them. You assume that one day the worst will come, and you make damn sure you'll survive it. Brenda. Thought she'd won when she cut that line. She thought she'd reduced me to the same smallness she demanded of everyone else in her beige empire. But she didn't know me. She didn't know I'd planned for the unthinkable. She didn't know that while she memorized the font requirements for welcome mats, I'd memorized the handshake protocols of a long-dead Cold War network. She didn't know that the quiet man on the corner house, the one she thought she could bully into submission, had the kind of contingency plans that keep entire cities from falling apart. The day I spliced into that trunk line, I thought about all of this, the late nights combing archives, the hours spent studying the layouts of networks that no one cared about anymore. People had called me obsessive, paranoid. But paranoia is just preparation nobody else understands yet. In the end, Brenda didn't just push me. She woke the ghost I'd buried under this house, and it came back hungry. By the end of that week, as the new fiber hummed in its concrete tomb and the Brenda bypass glowed in my network map, I found myself standing in my basement again, staring at the panel, at the words stenciled there in fading paint. Continuity of government. The purpose of that line had been simple. Keep the lights on, keep the country running, no matter what. And, in a strange way, it had done that. Not for Washington, for me. It had given me the power to defend my business, my clients, my life, and, most satisfying of all, it had given me the means to dismantle the little dictatorship Brenda had built on top of it. I smiled to myself as I sealed the panel back up. Sometimes, the ghosts of history aren't just relics. Sometimes, they're weapons, and I was done pretending I didn't know how to use them. Brenda didn't move away. That would have been merciful. Instead, she stayed. Her house, formerly the palace of pastel tyranny, became just another beige box with a tightly drawn curtain and an empty front lawn. No more garden gnome brigade. No more seasonal flags fluttering with smug HOA compliance. Just silence. For the first time since I moved in, Brenda looked like what she actually was. Small, not terrifying, not righteous, just small. Word traveled fast in Maple Creek Estates. Not because people gossiped loudly, but because they gossiped quietly. Whispered conversations over hedges, muttered remarks on dog walks, knowing glances exchanged over trash bins now left out past curfew without fear. I'd become a kind of myth. The man who'd beaten the HOA. The man who'd rerouted his house through a Cold War backbone just to keep a tyrant from winning. The man who'd slapped Brenda in the face with a $75,000 invoice and smiled while doing it. But myths make people nervous. They don't shake your hand or bake you casseroles. They glance at you like you're holding a loaded weapon in your smile. Nobody welcomed me, but nobody crossed me either. And that was exactly how I liked it. The new HOA board scrambled to contain the damage. Carol, the interim president, sent out 3 emails in as many days, apologizing for the unfortunate events and promising to restore transparency, communication, and community spirit. They started allowing things they never had before. Satellite dishes, decorative mailboxes, lawns mowed to a scandalous 3 inches. Someone even put up a string of purple LED lights around their garage, and no one said a word. The HOA had gone, from militant to meek overnight. It wasn't reform. It was fear. They'd stared into the abyss, the legal threats, the regulatory reviews, the possibility of Brenda's sins becoming theirs, and decided they liked beige conformity just fine. Thank you, me? I was invited to their next board meeting, not as a defendant, as a guest of honor. I declined. I didn't need a seat at their table. I already owned the floor they were standing on. 2 weeks after the incident, a new family moved in 3. Doors down. They were nice, said hello, offered lemonade when I was out working on the garage door, and then came the question, "So, you're the one who—" I nodded once, didn't say a word. That was enough. Their smiles tightened. Their tone changed, and they never mentioned the HOA again. Late one night, I saw her, Brenda. She was standing at the edge of her lawn, staring at the utility pedestal where my fiber line used to be, like it might still rise from the dirt and challenge her authority again. She didn't see me, watching from the window, or maybe she did, and just didn't care anymore. She looked tired, not angry, not righteous, just lost. There was something about that moment that almost stirred something in me. Almost. But then I remembered the panic in Frank's voice. The emergency letters, the water supply teetering on the edge of contamination, all because Brenda thought. The font on my welcome mat was too rebellious, so no, I didn't pity her, I just understood her now. She needed control, and I needed peace. And for one brief, glorious stretch of time, the world had forced her to give me mine. I found the pie baker. It was Mrs. Lewis from 1142, the quiet older woman who always walked her schnauzer. In the evenings, she approached me while I was adjusting the antenna array for a new client setup. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "about everything. You were right." I looked at her. Not angry, not smug, just curious. "Why didn't anyone stop her before?" I asked. Mrs. Lewis sighed. "Because most of us thought we couldn't. Or worse, we thought we shouldn't. It was easier to go along, less noise, less attention. You didn't care about any of that, did you?" I did. I cared deeply, but I'd learned something valuable years ago. Something Brenda had helped me remember. Silence is only peace when it's chosen. When it's forced, it's control. "No," I said. I cared more about what was right. She smiled. "Good. We need more people like that." Then she walked away, and I stood there for a long time, watching her fade into the dusky light. There was one final thing. A letter. Handwritten. No return address. No name. It arrived in a plain envelope, slipped quietly into my mailbox. Inside was a single sentence, "You won." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Brenda. No threats. No justification. No plea for forgiveness. Just that. You won. And somehow, that felt more final than any apology ever could. People like Brenda never admit they're wrong, but sometimes they stop fighting. And in the quiet that follows, you hear something deeper than surrender. You hear understanding. I didn't frame the letter. I didn't keep it. I burned it. Watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash in the same fire pit where I once imagined tossing every one of her violation notices. And as the smoke drifted into the sky, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. It was over. Not just the battle. The war. And the silence that settled over Maple Creek Estates wasn't fearful anymore. It was earned. There's a certain hum my servers make when everything is perfect. Not loud, not intrusive, just steady. Comforting. It's the sound of control, of systems running exactly as they should, of peace. That's what I heard now, sitting in my office, staring at a wall of tranquil green indicators across my triple monitors. Tri-State Water Authority, stable, Midwest Power, cooperative, secure. Every client, every node, every endpoint, safe. And beneath it all, my new fiber line, buried under. Reinforced concrete, untouchable, whispered like a lifeline that would never fail me again. Even the old ghost hummed faintly. The Brenda bypass, still configured, still ready. A reminder that sometimes the past isn't dead. Sometimes it's just waiting for you to need it. People ask what victory feels like. They imagine fireworks, celebration, triumph. They're wrong. Victory feels like this. Quiet, uninterrupted, earned. It had been weeks since Brenda's letter. Weeks since the HOA crumbled under its own weight. The neighborhood looked the same on the surface. Beige houses, trimmed hedges, manicured lawns. But the air was different. No more patrols, no more warning slips, no more queen in pink watching from the sidewalks. The residents still avoided me, not out of contempt but out of respect. Or maybe fear. Either way, they left me alone, and that was all I ever wanted. I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee that tasted better than it had in months. I thought about Brenda, about the gavel in her hand that night at the community center, about her smugness as she presented her PowerPoint, so sure of herself, so untouchable, and about the moment her world cracked open when she realized she wasn't the one holding the weapon anymore. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. Brenda was a tyrant, but tyrants only exist because people let them. And for too long, I let her. That was the real lesson. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's surrender. My phone buzzed. An email, a new contract, another client, another system to protect, another reminder that my job, my real job, is defending people who don't even know I exist. It's not glamorous. It's not flashy, but it matters. And for the first time in weeks, I felt that weight lift. Not because the work had gotten lighter, but because my house was my sanctuary again. My servers were my choir. My network was my shield. And my life, for now, was mine. I pulled up my network map one last time before shutting everything down for the night. There it was, a quiet little tertiary connection, my ghost, the Brenda bypass. I hovered my mouse over it for a moment, then renamed it Continuity, because that's what this really was. Not revenge, not war, not even victory. Continuity of my business, my work, my peace, and me. I shut off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of my servers in the dark. The hum filled the room. And for the first time since I'd moved to Maple Creek, I felt exactly what I came here for. Not just quiet. Peace. The kind you win and keep.